Hello everybody, it's Mike here at Game From Scratch, and in the last several years, coming up on a decade now of running Game From Scratch, the YouTube channel here, and now running Dev Game, I've consistently gotten a couple of questions over and over again. It used to be all about what programming language should I use, and that's kind of gone by the wayside. We've had the ascendancy of game engines, and now that is by far and away the biggest question. Which game engine should I use, or more specifically, why don't I just use Unity? And you'll see that if you browse through any of the time I do a video on a particular game engine, any game engine, you will get at least one comment along the lines of, why don't you just use Unity? Or why is this better than Unity? Or why would I want to do this? We have Unity. And there's reasons for this. Unity is definitely the 900-pound gorilla in the room, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. So today we're going to talk about why you potentially would want to use Unity and why you may not. So this is sort of a justification for why I cover game engines that you may not particularly understand the purpose of, like why does this exist in a world where Unity exists? So we're going to look at some of the reasons why you'd want to use Unity and some of the reasons why you wouldn't. Now, there's not going to be a whole lot of opinion in this. So I'm going to try and keep this as factual as possible. I'm not going to say that Unity is better than X or that Unity is worse than Y, because the perfectly good answer to the question of why not Unity, well, frankly, sometimes there's no answer to that. Sometimes Unity is, in fact, the right choice. Unity gets a lot of grief from certain people, but it is the #1 game engine for a lot of reasons. Now, I've got a caveat about what I mean by #1. That doesn't mean that it's the best. There's no such thing as the best. Some engines are great at one thing and not so great at another. There's a reason why there are these trade-offs that exist, and this is why we have so many engines in this world today. But I did put together this in text form. I'll link that down below. So if you want to see the explanations I'm using as I go through this, it is available on Dev Game as an answer to this question. Now, let's jump right in with some of the details on Unity. So first off, you would start with, well, why exactly would you use Unity? What's so great about Unity? And probably the best thing going for Unity right now is its popularity. So, and this is true of just about everything in life, to be honest. Like, why would I buy a Toyota? Well, because everyone buys Toyotas, you know, and there's an upside to that. That means that service is available. It means that, you know, mechanics that know how to work on it are available, et cetera, et cetera. Well, the same is true in the game engine world. If you have the most popular game engine, that means you can get the most tutorials, the most books, the most people with experience. So if you need to hire or if you're looking to get a job, going with the most popular thing obviously has its advantages. So that's definitely one of the aspects. Now, another big thing, and you're going to see basically a cycling list going by in the background while we do this video, and that's just some of the other engines that are available out there. I don't necessarily mean that I'm endorsing any of them, but you are going to see a few of the options pop up in the background while we go through this video. So there's strength #1 for Unity. Definitely, by far and away, it is the most popular, and thus it has the biggest community, and there is a lot of power in that. And again, if you're looking for a job, there's a lot of sense learning the most popular game engine out there. Now, another big strength of Unity is the fact that it runs everywhere, on everything. There's probably not a more portable game engine. Now, you've got some that kind of give it a run for the money. You've got things like the Unreal Engine, for example, runs on almost the same number of platforms, but Unity, I think, just takes the cake here. Unity runs on everything. So the tooling itself runs on Mac, on Windows, on Linux, sort of, and you can target all the consoles out there. So pretty much Xbox One, PlayStation 4, Wii. If something comes out, it's going to be targeted by Unity. And it's generally the manufacturers work with Unity to make their stuff work. So obviously then if you've got a new device like Leap Motion, a VR headset, etc., chances are the first platform they're going to make it work for is Unity game engine. So if you want to target as many targets as possible with one code base, it's hard to beat Unity in that regard. Now, Unreal Engine, again, does come close, but definitely Unity wins on that one. And now another big feature of Unity is it's feature rich. I'm not going to get into the feature set of Unity, but you've got everything there. You've got 2D, 2.5D, 3D, VR, AR, cinemachines, so cinematics, animation, state machines, particle systems, support for every major content creation tool out there. Pretty much, if there's a feature that a game engine needs, Unity has it. It's a very flush with features engine. And a lot of times when you do the bullet point list to any other engine, it's going to be missing a lot of the stuff that Unity has. Unity has a huge, absolutely massive development team of hundreds of people behind it, and that shows up in the feature list. Now, another big strength of the Unity game engine is it's got a gigantic asset store. Now, a lot of game engines have asset stores. This is a place where you can buy scripts, models, etc. But Unity, by far and away, is the largest, the most populated, a huge asset store. And the asset store is pretty nice, especially if you need to get materials or resources for building your game. An asset store is a shining great example in that case, especially when you're just starting out or if you need to fill in the pieces for a team skill that your team may not necessarily have. Another nice thing about Unity is the new programmable pipeline and high-def pipeline really ups the graphics fidelity of the engine. We'll get back to that one in a few minutes when we're talking about the negatives, but the new programmable pipeline coming soon is really going to improve the graphics on the Unity game engine, so that's definitely a plus. Another plus, and this is again another recent development and also a minus, is it finally has modern C# support. For years and years and years, Unity was stuck using a Stone Age version of the C# game engine. And now that Mono has made C# available for free, they're updating to include C# 7 support and much more modern C# support. On top of that, they're also modernizing their underlying code, the technology being used. They're bringing in ECS or Entity Component System support, job system for parallel code, and the burst compiler for making it all work faster. So those are nice language level features that are being added or improved upon the Unity game engine that are definitely nice to see. Another big feature in the plus of the Unity game engine is it is battle tested and proven. And this is a big one. This is one of those things where smaller game engines struggle because you say, well, what games have been shipped using this? And a lot of times the answer comes back as, well, there are none yet, or, this is work in progress, whatever. When you look at a Unity type game engine, or especially an Unreal game engine, you can say, this one was used to make, and then the list of titles made with Unity is just huge. I bet you there's more games made with Unity than any other game engine in history. It's got a huge shipped list. And so you know what you're capable of doing with the Unity game engine, and that is a big plus selling point in it. So you know someone else has managed to make X work, so you can probably make X work yourself. Big plus point there. And then finally, it's free to get started with Unity. And this is kind of a recent development. They've changed the pricing structure around a bit, but basically you can get started using the Unity game engine with no capital outlay. So that's a big plus point. It used to cost a couple $100, or the pro version were stripped down and gimped up, etc. That is not a thing anymore. Basically, the version you get completely for free is the version that everyone else is using. Now, you do get into, once you make a certain threshold of revenue, you've got to pay them more and more money. And this we're going to come back to in the minus sections in a bit, but those are basically the biggest reasons I can see to use Unity today. Huge community, huge asset store, huge number of platforms supported. There are definitely some major pluses there. So this whole video is why not use Unity? Well, let's talk about some of the why you may not want to use Unity kind of sides of this equation. And first one is open source. And this kind of comes in a separate couple steps. There's open sources in open source engines such as the Godot game engine, or a number of frameworks out there such as Ogre or SDL, etc. Those are open source in that the source code is available and the license to use that source code is very liberal. So you are free in every definable way. And sometimes if that is a requirement for you, that is a big deal. And Unity is by far and away not open source. So if open source is one of your defining criteria, look elsewhere. Now, Unity is starting to release some of the source code for reference purposes, but you're never going to be, or at least you currently just can't build a copy of Unity. You can customize it and make it the way you want to, at least without a very, very expensive source license. So open source is definitely a caveat there. If you want full-on open source, Unity is a terrible choice. Literally, it's not an option. Again, some of the code is being released for reference purpose or for debugging purpose, but it's still not even open source like Unreal Engine is, in that the source code for Unreal is available. It's just the license is limited. It's not an open source license. It's still a closed source license, but you have access to the source code. In the case of Unity, you have pretty much no source code. You can't customize Unity in any way using the source code, for example, or if for some reason, and this is really far-fetched, but if Unity Technologies went out of business, you don't have the source code. You're absolutely screwed. Now, not so far-fetched scenario is if Unity does something and fork things off that you don't like, you don't have the freedom of creating your own fork and maintaining it yourself. So open source has a lot of strength. And if you're thinking about open source, then you want to lean more towards game engines such as the Godot game engine or Zenko game engine or Wave engine or Babylon, the list goes on and on and on. Probably the most popular right now open source game engine alternative is the Godot game engine, if that's a criteria for you. But if you just want that source code available for customization, then the Unreal Engine may be a better fit, as is CryEngine now has all the source code available as well. So does Lumberyard. So there are a lot of options out there if you want source code access. So that one is a huge catch and negative in terms of Unity. Now, another one that's kind of this one's a little bit more controversial, a little bit subjective, but definitely one of those things that Unity has struggled with since day one. And I mentioned a few minutes ago that Unity now has a programmable pipeline, and that's a yay, good thing. Well, this kind of comes into what I'm talking about here. Is one of the things, the negatives against Unity has been graphic fidelity. And people would just straight out say that Unreal Engine and CryEngine capable of making better looking games. And, a lot of the quality or the look of a game comes down to the art style. But if you're going for that full-blown AAA game, Michael Bay effect kind of thing, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think there are any AAA games shipped from the Unity game engine yet. You've got some A quality games, but there's nothing along the lines of Crisis, Gears of War, Mortal Kombat, etc. Like those big money commercial games. Well, Unreal Engine, CryEngine to a slightly lesser degree, the Lumberyard game engine, they all have these big AAA quality titles, these huge multi-platform graphic extravaganza titles. And so far, Unity hasn't really. Unity's been more in the middling-sized studios, things like Pillars of Eternity, Firewatch. Those kind of titles are what Unity has been known for. So if you wanted that AAA Uber graphics thing, you generally gravitated towards the Unreal Engine. Now, with the new programmable pipeline and the high definition pipeline, that gap has narrowed a whole lot, if actually is just non-existence now. So the AAA thing, we might start seeing Unity AAA titles show up. And then again, to a lot of my audience, most of you guys are indie, smaller developers, smaller teams. And in that case, you really shouldn't be worrying about this for the most part in the first place, because it's going to be more your art style and those kind of things that are your limiting factors, more so than your game engine's graphics pipeline. But the biggest thing you got to recommend, if you don't like the Unity look or the Unreal look or the Crisis look, you move beyond the default shaders, and a lot of that goes away. But now that performance potential is there with the high def pipeline. But one of the definite negatives with Unity, at least traditionally, is if you wanted that AAA look, you had to go with Unreal or Crisis or or CryEngine or one of those other choices like that. Another one, slightly subjective. This is definitely, in my opinion, though, Unity is getting long in the tooth. The Unity editor is kind of ugly. It needs a bit of a facelift. When you go from, say, using Unity to Unreal Engine back to back, the workflow is getting a little clunky. You can tell that they're fitting things into a UI that was never meant to do it. It's nice to see in 2018.2, they finally released high Dpi support, so it at least doesn't make my eyes bleed to use Unity now. But that interface is going on 10, 15 years now. They're going to have to do a facelift. And then behind the scenes, that clunkiness also applies to the code. And again, we're getting into subjective territory here, but Unity was very say amateur focused when it was created, back when it was a Mac only product, and then first ported over to Windows. It was made for small teams to do some things kind of easily. And so at the core of it, you have God classes like mono behavior that are just these giant bloated classes that don't cleanly separate code and data. And that can lead to some really craptastic coding styles. Now, the cool thing is this made game programming accessible to a lot of people, but it also encouraged some really crappy programming. And that is part of the core of, can you imagine no mono behavior in Unity? It's so fundamental and key to it. Well, this is actually where they're going with this whole ECS and jobs and all that stuff. It is a cleaner way to code going forward, a modern way of coding going forward. And, a movement away from God classes is a good move, especially if you want to make parallel code that has less dependency, where you decouple your data from your code. Right now, it's kind of hackish to make that work. And at the very least, you still need that gigantic mono behavior class in there, even as a bootstrap now with the new ECS stuff. But it is coming soon. This is one of those things that will solve itself in time. But right now, the default programming experience in Unity is pretty gross and encourages some really sloppy, gross code. And this is coming from just a programmer's perspective. If you're a designer or very amateur in your programming approach, or you just don't care about software design per se, you may not care in this level. But if you do care about those things and you want to try and create a really nice, clean code in Unity, you're fighting with Unity to make that happen because of some of the design decisions they made very early on. That made sense at the time, make a little bit less sense as time goes on, and they're trying to fix them. But that kind of leaves you in this perpetual beta kind of cycle. It's going to be a while until ECS is the way forward. And ECS is not as easy, so you're going to see some people that just are not liking this approach. It's not going to integrate as nicely into the editor. So it's going to be interesting to see how well Unity managed to update their editor and managed to update the underlying coding way. They're working on both things, but that's going to take some time. And like I said, in the meantime, those things are both a little long in the tooth. And if you don't like it, well, you're going to hate that aspect of it. So it's definitely a reason to not like Unity. Now, probably, though, one of the biggest reasons, especially on this channel, where I would recommend against Unity is so often overkill. To learn just a simple thing. Like if I want to learn 2D game programming, and you've got the choice between learning 2D game programming using Unity or using, say, Love. Love, you're going to learn it in an afternoon. Unity is going to take you a week or two. Like it's just, it's not hard to do 2D in Unity. It's just gross overkill. So if you're looking at making a 2D game, it probably doesn't make sense to use Unity. Like you'll probably be 5 times more productive in a tool like Defold or Game Maker, or even using just the 2D side of Godot. It's 2D is shoehorned on a 3D engine, and it feels that way sometimes. So if you're just making a 2D game, it doesn't often make sense to have a full-blown 3D engine. And Unity is getting better. It's providing better tiling tools and all of that kind of stuff, but a dedicated 2D engine generally will just do the job better, easier, and a much faster to learn system, and sometimes even faster because it's optimized towards doing what it is meant to do, which is make 2D games. So again, sometimes Unity is just straight out overkill for the type of game you're trying to create. So that one's definitely important. Now the next one gets a little iffy, confusing, and this is on a case-by-case basis, but this is one of those things about picking a game engine in general. And for a lot of teams, especially bigger teams, budget. Now, I mentioned earlier up front, you can get started with Unity completely free, but eventually you got to pay some money. Unity is a company, and they're making millions upon millions of dollars, so there's got to be a reason behind that. Well, once you hit a certain revenue threshold, you have to buy the pro version. There is a license cost in there, and you're comparing it to their peers. You've got different licensing schemes. So, for example, you got a free and open source game engine like Godot. Well, you just buy it, and you just download it, and it's yours, and you're good to go. That's the nice thing about open source free software. That free part is really sweet. So if you build your game with the Godot game engine, doesn't matter how much money you make, you are 100% getting all of it. Same with maybe not necessarily open source game engines, but free game engines, such as the Defold engine. You make a game in the Defold engine that makes a whole lot of money, you made a whole lot of money. Whereas you start now looking at the Unity game engine, your price structure basically is set to your team size. So you're going to have to buy a number of licenses based on your revenue amount at a set cost of a couple grand per license, etc. Whereas when you get into, say, CryEngine or Unreal Engine, they're looking at a percentage base. So you pay 5% of your money to them. So if you make a game, it makes $100,000, you pay them $5,000. And there are minimum revenue thresholds, etc. So trying to break down which one makes the most sense to you is challenging. But for some people, the cost of using Unity is, if you're in that certain threshold of making over $100,000 but less than, say, $200,000, it could be a whole lot cheaper to be using another game engine. But for a lot of people, if you're not making anything right now, don't let revenue be a big deal. Most people don't ship and make, your first game generally isn't PUBG, but if it is PUBG, suddenly that royalty-based license from Unreal Engine just got quite expensive because they're paying millions upon millions of dollars, whereas if they'd gone with the Unity game engine, they would have maybe paid $60,000, $70,000. So again, the license is very individual to your game development team, your goals with the game. But for some people, the Unity license just doesn't work well for you. And that can definitely be a factor for not choosing Unity. Now, another reason to not go with Unity is you don't want to use C#. And this one's actually getting more and more prevalent because basically Unity's all in on C# now. It used to be back in the day, Unity offered Boo, which was a Python variant, and Unreal Script. Oh, sorry, Unity Script. I don't think they called it Unreal Script. That would be weird. They offered Unity Script, which was basically a modified version of JavaScript. So for JavaScript developers or Python developers, there were programming language options for you. But now that they're all in on this whole, well, now that they can get Mono for free, basically, all those other languages are being shunted to the curb. Now, Boo was shunted years and years ago, but the JavaScript version or Unreal Script, or Unity Script was basically just deprecated in the last version. And that's alienated a lot of people. So if you don't want to work in the C# programming language, well, that's kind of your only option when it comes to Unity. Now, there is a C++ layer available if you pay for the Pro upgrade version or possibly a source license. I'm not sure what the issue is there, but there are big bucks involved if you want to work in C++. So if you're not a C# developer or you do not like C# for whatever reason, run away from Unity. It is totally the wrong game engine for you. Next up, and this is one of those ones where you could choose another game engine because it's a project you're doing for fun. And if you don't find Unity fun, don't use Unity. Like, there are all kinds of game engines out there that may not make any sense other than the fact that they're fun to work with. And that's a perfectly valid reason to go ahead and choose a game engine that it just fits you nicely. If you just want to work with that particular engine, work with that engine. It's all about what you're trying to accomplish. And if what you're trying to accomplish is to learn, low-level programming, or you want to learn a different language, or you just think something looks fun, that's a perfectly valid reason to pick that engine, and go ahead and pick that engine. And another thing, kind of in the same realm, another reason why you may not want to use Unity is because you want to work at a lower level. Now, when I mean lower level, I don't really necessarily mean like assembly language type stuff. I mean, with a framework instead of an engine. Now, Unity, this goes back to Unity can be overkill. Well, it can be massive overkill. Sometimes you want to just write code and have your code do stuff. And I know I'm oversimplifying it, but if you want your game to work at that level, if you're trying to create a simple 2D game, or you want to really customize things to work your own way, there's a good chance you want to work with a framework instead of an engine. So you don't necessarily need their level editor. You don't need their animation state tools. You don't need the 3D components, or you don't need the 2D components, or whatever. You just need a very focused set of stuff. Well, then you may want to be working with a framework and rolling your own tool set on top. So if you want to work at that lower level and implement the tools that you need yourself, because the problem is when you use someone else's tools, you also use their workflow. When you build your own tools, you get your own workflow. So you can match it nicely to your end result, or the end game you're wanting to work with. So it may make sense for you to check out something like Monogame, or Cocos 2D, or Swift, or like there's hundreds and hundreds of framework level stuff, SDL, SFML, the list goes on and on and on. Or you can get into the JavaScript stuff. You got things like Phaser, Create.js, 3JS, etc. There's so many choices if you want to work at the framework level. But if you want to get that, that level below the editor environment where you're kind of implementing pieces yourself, but working on top of a layer below it, framework level may be what you're wanting. And in that case, well, Unity is kind of a bad fit. And the funny thing is, I've seen a lot of people that try to turn Unity into a framework. And there's 4 or 5 projects I've already seen that already do this. And in that case, just use a framework, damn it. So that is definitely one of those things. Another one is, and this one, I might be wrong on. I'm not a Linux developer, so I'm going by community feedback. But it sounds like Linux and Unity kind of suck. That the Unity tools on Linux are normally lagging behind, or awful, or crashy, or whatever. That's something I've consistently heard, but I've not experienced myself. But this could be a point. If you're a Unix developer or a Linux-based developer, and the tooling is terrible, well, it may not be the right engine for you. I don't know if that is still true. I don't know. I know that once was true, but I don't know if the current versions, if the Unity version is, the Linux version is up to snuff or not. But that is definitely one thing to keep in mind. If the tools on Linux suck and you're a Linux developer, maybe Unity isn't the right platform for you. Now, another one that's kind of on the same topic of platforms, and this is one of those ones that I at least personally attest to. If you're a single platform developer, a cross-platform tool like Unity or Unreal, etc., kind of lose a lot of their charm, especially if that platform is the web. So if you're building a web-based game, I say you should use a web-based framework, because the rest of these basically use something like mscripting, which is basically compiling code down into this weird sort of assembly code, which is literally, it's legit JavaScript that runs in your browser, so you can run your game in the browser with good performance. But if something goes wrong, oh my God, does it ever go wrong? So if there's browser support issues, you need to wait on the game engine tool manufacturer to be able to fix that. Whereas if you use a dedicated framework and the language, the native language. So if you're writing JavaScript to run in the browser and you need to debug it, well, it's your own code. It's not system generated gibberish that's impossible to debug. So if your primary platform is in fact the web, work in a web language, in my humble opinion. And you can port a web language to several different platforms, but then you start getting into that whole, okay, if you're working with a bunch of different platforms, then suddenly working in JavaScript makes a little bit less sense. So that one's kind of a trade-off, depends on your situation. But if you're literally just making an HTML5 game, for example, go with 3JS, Babylon, Play Canvas, Phaser, etc. Go with a framework that works natively to those environments. Go with the environment that is meant to work with. Makes your debugging process, your build process, all those things streamlined, faster, more efficient, less error prone, etc. But just do keep in mind when you start looking at multi-platform support, then things get trickier. So it's a trade-off, and you got to pick which way to go. But sometimes, choosing the platform native language makes a lot more sense. At the same time, if you're making an iOS only game, maybe it does make sense to use Swift. Personally, I don't get it. I wouldn't lock myself into Apple's ecosystem, but some people want to. And if that's the case, if you never plan to target another platform, it can be a very pleasant experience, and it makes sense for you. And in that case, locking into something like Unity may not make sense. And then the final reason why you may not want to use Unity, you don't like Unity. You know what? That's fine. You can't turn around and say that Unity's bad. Unity's not bad. Unreal Engine is not bad. Most of these game engines are not bad. Very few game engines are, in fact, bad. Unity is a great engine, but it's not great for everybody. And a lot of people could come to Unity, see that user interface, and go, no, I'm done. Or they can see the workflow and go, nope, I'm done. Or they see C# support in there and go, nope, I'm done. Or they could see another game engine and go, oh, I love this workflow so much more. Well, that is 100% valid. Like the reason why so many game engines exist is because we all have different tastes, different wants, different needs, different requirements, different likes, different hates, and that's legit. And if you dislike Unity because you dislike Unity, that's 100% valid reason to not use Unity. Don't let anyone pressure you into it or against it. Make your own damn decision on this one, because that is a perfectly valid reason to not want to use something. And the cool thing about this day and age is we are so bloody spoiled for choice. We have so many options, and so many of them are very good that do what makes sense for you. And hopefully this video kind of summarized things. This is not don't choose Unity. I obviously showed you the shining points of Unity. I think in a lot of cases, Unity makes a lot of sense. I think in a lot of cases, Unity doesn't make a lot of sense. And this is my 27.5-minute long answer to all of those comments I get every time on the forum. Why would I not use Unity? Well, these are my reasons why. Hopefully that made sense. Hopefully you agree with some of them. Maybe you have some of your own. Maybe you want to refute some of what I said. Interesting conversations are bound to be down below, but the cool thing about doing this video or writing this article is I can now just link to it. And when people say, why would I use this and not use Unity? Well, this is why. This is my opinion. This is why on Game From Scratch and on DevGame, I cover all kinds of different game engines. First off, I love technology. Second off, what works for one does not work for another. So when you see a game engine that I'm focusing on my channel and you're like, why the hell would anyone want to use that? Well, I guarantee you there's someone out there that went, that's exactly what I'm looking for. And that is perfect. You've got your tool, he's got his tool, she's got her tool, and we're all tools. Works for me. All right, so that's it for now. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I don't think this should be a contentious conversation. I think it's pretty straightforward in what I said. I know there's going to be some Unity lovers that don't like to hear negatives of their engine. And I know there's some people that hate Unity regardless of, facts or reality. Hopefully there's not too much of that down below. But you know what? If you're on either one of those sides and you've got an argument, I'd love to hear it also down below. All right, I will talk to you all later. Oh, and I will link this the text version of what I just did down below as well. All right. See you all later. Goodbye.